The familiar sound of cash registers and measuring tape had replaced the electronic beeps and whirs of early computer systems 25 years ago, but Robert Bob Chen still approached every technical problem at his hardware store with the systematic logic that had once made him one of the founding fathers of the video game industry. Bob, 71, sat in the eighth row of the Tonight Show studio, his programmer's mind automatically analyzing the digital displays and electronic systems while his engineer's hands moved in unconscious coding gestures on his lap. The small Chen's Hardware 25 years reliable service patch on his work shirt caught the studio lights as he adjusted his position with the precise movements of someone who had spent decades working with intricate electronic components. To the hundreds of customers who had sought Bob's help with home repair projects over 2.5 decades, he was just another knowledgeable hardware store owner who somehow could fix any electronic device and had an unusual understanding of how complex systems work. What they didn't know was that their screws and electrical supplies were being sold by a man who had programmed some of the first commercially successful video games and helped establish the foundations of what would become a multi-billion-dollar industry. But what Bob didn't know was that his story had been quietly circulating among gaming historians after someone had discovered that several classic Atari games credited to Chen were created by the same person who now ran a small hardware store in Brooklyn. The revelation had gone viral among retro gaming enthusiasts who remembered the innovative programming techniques that had defined early arcade gaming. Bob's story had begun in the pioneering days of electronic entertainment, when young programmers working in Silicon Valley garages believed they could create entirely new forms of human interaction through the power of computer code. Born in San Francisco to Taiwanese immigrant parents who ran a small electronics repair shop, Bob had shown exceptional mathematical ability and logical thinking from childhood, able to understand circuit diagrams and programming concepts that baffled adults. After graduating from UC Berkeley with a degree in electrical engineering in 1975, Bob had been recruited by Atari during the company's explosive early growth period. The video game industry was so new that there were no established rules, no proven methods, no textbooks on how to create interactive entertainment. Every game was an experiment. Every programming solution was being invented for the first time. Over 10 years, Bob Chen had become one of Atari's most innovative programmers. He'd created the artificial intelligence systems for combat, developed the physics engines that made asteroids feel realistic, and programmed the complex maze algorithms for Pac-Man variants that had captivated millions of players. His programming was characterized by elegant efficiency, creating maximum entertainment value within the severe memory limitations of 1970S computer hardware. But the video game industry had crashed spectacularly in 1983, devastating companies and ending careers overnight. Consumer interest in video games had plummeted, major companies had gone bankrupt, and thousands of programmers had found themselves unemployed in an industry that seemed to have no future. Bob, despite his innovations and contributions, had been laid off, along with hundreds of other Atari employees, when the company downsized to survive the market collapse. The hardware store had been purchased in 1999 with savings and severance money as a practical way to use his electronics knowledge, while the video game industry tried to rebuild itself around home computers rather than arcade systems. But 25 years later, Bob had discovered unexpected satisfaction in helping customers solve real-world problems with tools and materials, applying the same systematic problem-solving approach that had made him a great programmer to helping people fix and build things in their homes. The Tonight Show tickets had been a surprise gift from his regular customers, longtime patrons who had appreciated not just Bob's technical knowledge, but his patient teaching style and ability to explain complex concepts in ways that made perfect sense to non-technical people. It was a Monday night taping in November, and Jimmy was in good spirits after interviewing a young entrepreneur about his new gaming app. During his commercial break interaction with the audience, his attention was drawn to Bob by his systematic way of observing the studio's electronic systems and the engineer's precision with which he analyzed everything around him. "Sir, you're looking at our equipment like someone who really understands electronics. Are you in the tech industry?" Bob straightened with the practiced posture of someone who had spent decades solving technical problems under pressure. Hardware store owner, sir. Chen's Hardware in Brooklyn. Been helping customers with home repairs and electronic projects for 25 years. A warm murmur went through the nearby audience members. Hardware store owners provided essential services that help people maintain their homes and complete projects, and 25 years of reliable service deserved recognition. 25 years in hardware, you must know how to fix just about anything. Bob's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm for problem solving. Most technical problems have logical solutions if you understand the underlying systems. Whether it's electrical wiring, plumbing connections, or electronic circuits, you learn to trace problems to their source and find efficient solutions. You talk about problem solving like programming or engineering, very systematic approach. Well, good troubleshooting follows similar principles, whether you're debugging code or diagnosing why someone's outlets aren't working. You isolate variables, test hypotheses, find the most elegant solution. Jimmy noticed something in Bob's language, a technical sophistication that suggested experience with serious engineering or programming work. Bob, have you always worked in hardware? You seem to have technical training beyond typical home repair knowledge. Bob paused as if deciding how much of his background to reveal. Actually, I used to work in the computer industry before I opened the hardware store, programming specifically. I worked on early video games back when the industry was just getting started. The mention of early video game programming caught the audience's attention immediately. The origins of video games were legendary among technology enthusiasts. You programmed early video games? Bob, that's incredible. What company did you work for? Atari, primarily. I was there during the late 70s and early 80s working on arcade games and home console systems. Combat, Asteroids, Variations, some of the maze-based games. It was an exciting time. We were inventing interactive entertainment from scratch. Jimmy's curiosity exploded. Atari programmers from that era were legendary figures who had helped create an entire industry, and someone with that background running a hardware store suggested a fascinating story. Jimmy made a decision that would change everything. Bob, early Atari programming is gaming history. Would you mind coming down here and telling us about your video game career? Bob looked uncertain. Oh, I don't think people want to hear about old programming stories. That technology is so primitive compared to modern gaming. Trust me, people definitely want to hear about gaming history from someone who lived it. Come on down. As Bob made his way to the stage with the methodical movement of someone who had spent years solving complex technical problems, his bearing transformed completely, the confident presence of someone who had once been on the cutting edge of technological innovation. When he reached the stage, Jimmy guided him to a comfortable chair. Ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy announced, this is Bob Chen. For 25 years, he's been running Chen's Hardware, but before that, he spent 10 years programming classic video games at Atari during the birth of the gaming industry. Bob, tell us about those early days. Bob settled into the chair, and when he spoke about programming, his voice took on the passion and precision of someone who had been present at the creation of electronic entertainment. The late 70s at Atari were incredible. We were creating something that had never existed before, interactive entertainment where players could control what happened on screen. Every game was an experiment in human psychology, game mechanics, and technical innovation. The audience was completely quiet, understanding they were hearing about technological history from someone who had helped create it. What was it like programming games with such primitive technology? Bob's eyes lit up with memories of creative challenges that had defined his career. The technical limitations were severe. We had maybe 4 kilobytes of memory to work with, primitive processors, basic graphics capabilities, but limitations forced creativity. You had to find elegant solutions that created maximum entertainment with minimal resources. Tell us about some of the games you worked on. I programmed the AI systems for combat, making computer-controlled tanks behave intelligently within tiny memory constraints. I developed physics engines for asteroids, variations that made objects move realistically in zero gravity. Some of my proudest work was on maze generation algorithms that created infinite, unique puzzle layouts. Jimmy reached behind his chair and pulled out a tablet loaded with gaming history, databases, and Atari documentation. Bob, we did some research before tonight's show. He showed Bob archived game credits and programming documentation. According to Atari records, our Chen programmed essential systems for multiple classic games that are still considered foundational to the gaming industry. Bob looked stunned. You found my old programming credits? We did. Listen to this from a gaming historian. Art Chen's programming techniques, particularly his AI algorithms and physics engines, established standards that influenced game development for decades. His work represents some of the most elegant and efficient code in early gaming history. The studio fell completely silent. The audience was processing that they were meeting someone whose programming had helped create the video game industry. Bob, your games were clearly successful and influential. What happened? Why did you leave the gaming industry? Bob's expression grew more reflective, touching on one of technology's most dramatic market failures, the video game crash of 1983. The market collapsed almost overnight. Too many low-quality games, oversaturated market, consumer confidence disappeared. Atari and dozens of other companies went bankrupt or laid off most of their staff. So you left programming. But the entire industry seemed finished. Personal computers were emerging, but game programming was moving in directions that required different skills than arcade development. I needed stable income, and electronics repair seemed like a natural transition from programming. Jimmy leaned forward. But you never stopped being a programmer, did you? Bob smiled for the first time since taking the stage. Programming logic never leaves your brain. When customers bring me broken electronics, I still debug problems the same way I debug game code. Isolate the issue, test solutions systematically, find the most efficient fix. Jimmy continued reading from the tablet. Bob, we found something else. Modern game developers are studying your early programming techniques to understand the foundations of game design. Modern developers are studying my old code? Listen to this from a current game designer. Bob Chan's programming represents the DNA of modern gaming. His AI algorithms and efficiency techniques are still taught in computer science programs. Understanding his work is essential for any serious game developer. Jimmy stood and addressed the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, this man spent 10 years helping create the video game industry from nothing, then spent 25 years applying that same problem-solving expertise to helping his community with their practical needs. He turned back to Bob. The gaming community wants to honor you. The International Game Developers Association wants to induct you into their Hall of Fame, and several major gaming companies want to offer you consulting positions on retro gaming projects. Bob's eyes filled with tears. They want to honor my programming work? They do. And Bob, there's something else. Your early games are being re-released on modern platforms, introducing new generations to the innovative programming that helped define interactive entertainment. Jimmy had one more surprise. We have someone here who wanted to meet you. From backstage, Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari and one of the fathers of the video game industry, appeared carrying a vintage Atari console. Bob, Bushnell said, approaching with obvious respect, I've been looking for you for years. Your programming was some of the most innovative work we ever produced at Atari. You helped establish the technical foundations that made the entire gaming industry possible. Bob was openly crying now, overwhelmed by recognition from the man who had created the company where he'd done his most important work. Mr. Bushnell, you remember my programming? How could I forget? Your AI systems and physics engines were years ahead of anything our competitors were producing. Your code was so efficient and elegant that we're still studying it to understand how you achieved such sophisticated results with such primitive hardware. Jimmy sat back down beside Bob. Bob, you've spent 25 years thinking your programming career was ancient history, but what you really did was help create the foundation for an industry that now generates more revenue than movies and music combined. As they helped Bob back to his seat, he stopped and looked out at the audience one more time. Thank you for honoring my work, but I want young programmers to know innovation doesn't require the latest technology. Some of the most creative solutions come from working within constraints. Whether you're programming with 4 kilobytes or 4 gigabytes, the goal is the same. Create something that serves human needs elegantly and efficiently. The episode that aired became one of the most celebrated Tonight Show segments among technology enthusiasts, sparking renewed interest in gaming history and the pioneers who had built the industry from nothing. Bob's story inspired several major gaming companies to actively seek out early programmers for consulting and archival projects, recognizing that their foundational knowledge was irreplaceable. His hardware store became an unofficial museum of early gaming technology, where he taught young people about the history of interactive entertainment. Bob spent his retirement consulting on retro gaming projects and teaching programming history while continuing to run his hardware store part time. Discovering that leaving the gaming industry hadn't ended his contribution to technology, it had prepared him for a triumphant return when the world finally understood the historical importance of his innovations. At 73, Bob still approaches every problem with the programmer's logical methodology, still believes that elegant solutions can be found within any constraints, and still carries his original Atari employee badge alongside his hardware store keys, a reminder that true innovators never stop creating, they just find new platforms for their ingenuity. Because sometimes the most important innovations happen not in the latest technology companies, but in the minds of people who understand that whether you're programming entertainment or helping customers fix their homes, the goal is always the same. Use your knowledge and skills to make people's lives a little bit better, one elegant solution at a time.